I hated my job. I wanted to do something different.
What are you doing to allow you to make this work?
And then a publisher reached out. I think that's the big thing I've learned in the last 6 months here.
I guess if you were trying to give advice to your younger self, what would that look like?
If you're unhappy with your life, think about that and like dwell on that feeling. Like I wish I could like take those first 4 or 5 months where I was basically floundering and been like, here's a better way to spend your time. I knew kind of going into the end of it that I was going to do it again.
All right, hello and welcome to another episode of, I was going to say Scope Creepers. That is not what this is. This is How This Indie Dev, and it is a podcast that I am publishing on my own YouTube channel. Scope Creepers is a different podcast that I also do with my guest today, Aarimous.
Hey, Thomas, how's it going?
It's going good. So this is going to be a really fun conversation because I want to frame this as like revolve around your story because it's very interesting because you are not only a full-time game developer and content creator, but you have done it twice now. And I think that it's a very interesting journey that you've been on, and you have a lot of valuable knowledge that you can share. So I also will plug that you and I do conversations that we record on the regular, and we call it Scope Creepers because we're constantly expanding the scopes of our games, and it's a chronic problem. And we upload that in a separate channel that I will link below.
Yeah, this will be my first podcast that is not Scope Creepers.
Yeah.
Which is exciting. Having listened to podcasts for most of the last kind of decade and a half of podcasting, it'll be fun to be on someone else's.
Yeah, and usually when we talk, it's very much like a back and forth, but I wanted this one to be more like Aarimous centric because I think that I just want to highlight a lot of your story and just give you the platform to kind of take us through your journey and your learnings and all of that. So, yeah, I'll just give you the floor to introduce yourself real quick. You know, I know you're a game dev, you're a YouTuber, you're a streamer. You made a game on Steam called Chess Survivors. You're currently working on a new game called Hexag God. You just reached 10,000 YouTube subscribers, so
I did. Very
applause,
exciting.
applause.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Very weird to picture a room full of 10,000 people. Not that every one of those watch every video, but it is weird to picture that many people clicking the button. So
Totally.
pretty cool. Yeah. So like you said, I'm from Minnesota. So I'm a nice Midwesterner, and most of my career is spent doing software engineering. And back in college, when I first got into programming for my math major, actually, I naturally was like, oh, I love video games. Let me see if I can't make my own video game. And I think I downloaded something called Cocos 2D or I don't know. It was some framework that I pulled open into some Java editor and tried to make a game, and just kind of fell off of it because I didn't have any idea of what I was doing. And then throughout college, kind of just forgot about game development as something that could be interesting and never really thought about it as an actual path forward. So post-college, having some student debt and stuff like that, I decided to go find a job, found a Fortune 500 company, absolutely hated the job. I was a glorified Excel data checker, basically looking at data from old systems and pushing it into new ones. So throughout the beginning of that adventure, I was starting to find things I wanted to do with my free time that could make the job feel less like a slog. And a lot of that came down to trying to come up with ideas for companies with my friend, and we came up with a bunch of really interesting ideas, some of which we got to the point of being like, this would be really interesting, but we would have had to invest in lawyers and actually put our money into it, and it wouldn't have just been an idea. So I think the smallest actual company we made was a small blog where we just shared stuff about our lives. Looking back, I'm blown away that we didn't make a YouTube channel. Now that I have a YouTube channel and I know how to edit, I'm like, we could have done YouTube videos and it would have been a much easier medium than trying to find people to read our content as a blog source. So then throughout that kind of those years, I eventually stumbled into game development in 2020 when the pandemic hit. I was like, hey, I got a lot of time on my hands, and Ludum Dare, which is a game jam, was actually my first entry into doing game development, and the rest is kind of history. We can keep going into that story if you're interested, but that's basically how I found myself here today, was just stumbling through, hating my job, and trying to find hobbies on the side to help me be creative. And I've always wanted to start my own business because I think that's a really interesting thing to do and challenging thing to do, and I found I like challenge in my life.
Yeah, I can relate to a lot of that. I'm interested. How would you summarize like what your business plan is? Because you're doing this full time, but you are wearing a lot of different hats. And between you and I, we've talked about this in the past. We do a lot of things similarly, but also a lot of things differently. So if you were to like kind of highlight, because lots of people are trying to figure out how to make games full time, and I know there's a lot of different routes to do that. So what are you doing to allow you to make this work?
I've tried a lot of different things over the past 2 times of doing this, and I think the core of that through line has been trying to be agile and like follow what's working, both for me personally and then where I'm seeing the success. So I think the core business strategy right now would be to manage my time wisely and make sure that I'm trying not to burn myself out, but also like push myself enough where I'm not just like using the fact that I'm self-employed to like hang out and have more chill time watching HBO or whatever I'm watching on the side. So trying to manage that time wisely, but then also like the only really big constraint right now is that time. So where do I invest it? Do I spend time making YouTube videos? How often do I stream over on Twitch? Because it's also like Twitch, if you stream more often, more consistently, you'll have growth on Twitch. But like, as I'm a business, I have to think about the profit centers of the business. I can make some money off of Twitch. It's like $100 or $200 a month or something. So it's not nothing. And there are paths forward to making it becoming the whole profit center of the company, being a Twitch streamer, i.e. looking at like Pirate Software or even Jackie Codes, the level of people and support she gets on her channel is probably enough to like become a major line item on the budget. Or looking at YouTube and like diving into maybe taking YouTube sponsorships or something like that. But again, YouTube, probably the same thing with like, I think I've made like 20 videos in the last 2 months, which is a lot for me. And that's only resulted in probably like $200. So again, not a line item, but then I have Chess Survivors that's selling out there and that's making $600 to $900 a month. And that I'm not doing any work. So that's nice passive income. So I think for me, that pivoting and trying to keep things really simple and spend my time wisely has led me to let's make games, let's make products. And that's further like driven home by looking at other YouTubers and seeing how they eventually monetize themselves. A lot of people make t-shirts. A lot of people make some other brand. A lot of people kind of diversify their audience into building products. But as a developer first, I'm basically building the products and then using social media, i.e. just YouTube and Twitch, to make those products better, to get early adopters and testers of those products, and then find some people in there who will buy that as well. But I don't think most of my audience is going to be players. They're much more like full of a bunch of game developers.
Yeah, ain't that the problem though?
It is something to think about when you're looking at spending time into YouTube. It's like, what is this ratio? Even if it turns into wish lists, which I've heard somewhere that wish lists on Steam can kind of become this snowballing effect where the more wish lists you get, the more wish lists you get. But it's like, how many of those wish lists are actually high quality wish lists that'll convert into purchases? I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, totally. Cool. So you get out of college, you have a background in programming, you're working at this Fortune 500 company, and you are sensing this sort of dissatisfaction with your job and felt like it was a bit soul-sucking, and you were trying to find more enjoyment in your life through hobbies and reaching out in different ways and kind of seeing what interests you, where you can fill your free time. What did that transition period look like for you when you were like, you know what, I think I'm done with a typical 9 to 5 and I'm going to try something entirely different, like jumping full on 2 feet in?
Yeah, so that first job that I said was really soul-sucking, I eventually found a new job internally doing Salesforce work, which ended up being very lucrative and got me into the 6-figure salary range. Really had a great manager, a really good core team of people I worked with for about 3 years. But then my manager moved internally to go do something else, to go work for somebody else he had liked to work for. And I was kind of left with like, oh man, this team's going to kind of suck without him. And so I was actually in the process of buying a home, So that it all happened within a couple months, but then I started interviewing for other jobs as well. Went and found a company that paid me basically 50% more. So I think the salary was like 155,000, which at the still is a lot of money. At the time I was like, what the heck? That's so much more money than I was making at this Fortune 500 company. Didn't really think about why they were willing to pay me so much more, or if it was a good fit. I kind of just chased that money. And then the next 6 months were like basically a roller coaster ride of working at a really toxic company where there was just a lot of like political BS of people trying to get their own name on things. And like, there was some weird stuff where they were blaming contractors for like bugs and stuff in their system. And they were like basically flirting with like suing these contractors and stuff. And I told people, I was like, I feel uncomfortable by this. And eventually me and one of my friends who worked there, we became friends by working there, but we both decided to quit at the beginning of the year. So like January 6th, he came back, put a 1-day notice in. I put a 1-week notice in, kind of back to back on that. And then had been interviewing for other jobs and decided, I was like, you know what, I'm going to take about a month off. So I took about a month in January of that year. So this would be 2022 to hang out. And at the time I had just started my YouTube channel. So during that 6 months of this like really toxic company, one day I had just kind of really it was a Tuesday. It was November 16th. I was like, you know what? I need to do something. I'd been working on video games for about 2 years, and I was like, I need to do something creative. And so I'd wanted to make a YouTube channel at some point during that game development process, watching a bunch of game developers teach me something. I'm like, this is a really interesting way to inspire others to find some joy in creativity and use their programming skills in a very different way. And so I wanted to make something like that. And so I made my very first YouTube video that Tuesday. I remember being so dang nervous, like trying to talk to a camera and like look at a camera and I probably was using the microphone from the webcam that I had at the time. And I like had to go for laps around outside, just like trying to like think about how I would say what I was talking about. And I shared this like really kind of probably crude way of making a hexagon grid using Godot. And eventually I put that out there though. And some people watched it, and the video's still out there because although it's probably a really crappy tutorial, it's really fun to see where I'd come from. So the context of that toxic company combined with like quitting and having done like YouTube now and finding this like, I probably got 100 subscribers within the first couple months of making like small little videos and just kind of exploring that space. Then I had like I could do like full-time game development for about a month. And I was like, you know what, this is really, really interesting. This is really fun. This is very different. And I looked at all my savings and I figured, I was like, you know what, I have about 9 or 10 months of savings to spend on trying to make a video game. And I mean, it's probably the most risky thing I've ever done, but I decided to do it. I was in the late stage interview with another company, and the last step was to do a virtual on-site to see if it's a fit for me and a fit for them. And I just never scheduled it. And so I said, screw it. I'm listening to my gut. My gut's saying, go make video games. And then I spent the next 9 months making video games, eventually starting streaming, making more YouTube channels or YouTube videos and stuff like that. And that was the first stint. So it was really a mistake. It was really like an accidental thing that I did. I never like felt like, oh, I've done enough game development where now I know I can make a game. I would say the first stint in 2022 was like, I hated my job. I wanted to do something different. And I had never made a full game that was like published and commercially, like someone had to pay for it. And that was kind of ended up being the goal of that year.
That's awesome. It's super funny because when I quit my job, my full-time job, I planned it out for a while, and I was, running through all of the budget and everything. And I really liked my job actually. So it was like a really cool gig to leave. I was a programmer at a game studio, and we were making a really cool game. And, but it's hilarious because the day that I clocked into work to put in my 2 weeks notice, they laid off like a dozen people.
Wow.
and I wasn't one of them. But it was like I came in, like I worked remotely, so I checked Slack in the morning, and then I saw, like, there was like a big announcement about all these people who were getting laid off, and I was like, oh, by the way, I'm putting in my 2 weeks notice, but it's, I'm like, it's not related to the layoffs, but it was just such weird timing. But it also made me more confident in my decision, because a lot of people think that, what are you doing, like going off on your own, trying to like support yourself apart from a full-time job, because isn't that so risky, and I'm over here like, a dozen people that I work with just got axed out of the blue, so
Yeah.
it's staying where I was risky as well. But yeah, I don't know. It's super interesting. Okay. So that's cool. You get this taste of YouTube and game development. You're learning a lot, and you set out with this objective of, you give yourself some sort of financial runway, and you say, I want to make a commercial game.
Mm-hmm.
And so what did that process look like? Because I like the way that you have done this, because you've done everything in public. You're constantly uploading YouTube videos and streaming on the daily, and you're getting feedback from the community that you're growing about the games that you're designing and developing. But what did that look like for like that first stint of, okay, like I'm in complete control of my time now. How do I decide how to best use that time?
Because I stumbled into it, it felt like I was just stumbling for a long time, and I had been working on like a little auto battler, kind of like if you pictured like a Pokemon type game where you would have battling on top left and then top right, but like they would automatically be fighting, so you wouldn't be picking like abilities and stuff like that for them. And then you would have to pause the game in real time and like then determine, how am I going to interact with this game? So that ended up being this like game I was driving forward during that first couple months of stumbling through there. And then I was also trying to make a bunch of YouTube videos. So I was trying to do 2 YouTube videos a week, and one was going to be talking about that game, and the other was going to be about tutorialization, which is funny because that's what I'm doing now again.
Yeah.
Things go full circle.
Yep.
I thought I was doing something new with my content, and it turns out I'm just going back to the original plan. But I have taken down, of all those, I probably made like 15. I was making like a little checkers, so hexagons but checkers, and I made a series of probably like 15 videos that are absolutely garbage. And so they're all removed from my channel at this point, just because they're like, some of them were actually decent and are still there and got some views and stuff like that, but a majority of it's pretty bad. But that first couple months, it was a lot of really just kind of like stumbling through and a ton of learning, a lot of like experimenting, a lot of like trying to make a full game. Because up until that point, I had only ever done like really small game jam games that are pretty bad, but you need to make bad games in order to make good games. And then now starting to make like what I was going to say is like a real game is like that first step of trying to make something a bit bigger. Mm-hmm. Then I got really lonely. So it would have been like January, February, and then March. And one of the things I don't think you think about too much about your job is that it's a social thing as well. You're going and hanging out with coworkers, you're having daily meetings, even if it's stand-up meetings, which are boring and useless, you're still like talking to people and you're socializing, and there's some sort of camaraderie with your coworkers. And I started missing that quite a bit. And so toward the end of March of that year, I went ahead and tried to start doing streaming. And the main kind of vehicle of launching my stream, I think my very first stream was like a birthday stream that I did. I like played Slay the Spire to nobody watching, which is fine. I don't even know if I won or lost. But then I decided to participate in Ludum Dare and basically really like launch the stream through that, and had a few people hanging out helping me make the game. It's like Immune Cell Engineer or something like that for Ludum Dare. And then I spent time afterwards ranking other people's games and got more viewership that way. So that was kind of the genesis of doing Twitch streaming, was to not be as lonely during my game development process. I've always wanted to try streaming as well. Having watched Twitch for a very, very long time in my life, I thought this was a really good opportunity. If any opportunity arrived, would have been during that stint. So after that portion, I flirted with turning in the Ludum Dare game, which was my best game to date, the most fun game I had ever made, into a mobile game. I spent about a month doing that live on stream, intermixed with like rating other people's games. And then I saw the results of Ludum Dare and saw Shotgun King had won. And I was like, that's a really interesting idea of chess, to use like chess and then just like slap a shotgun in there and turn it into a roguelike. And I also saw Vampire Survivors and the success of that game. And that was the very first game I remember thinking, I think I could have made that game. And once you have that feeling, it's like, okay, I kind of combined those two ideas of like Shotgun King's kind of novel take on chess, plus like, I think I could make that game. And I merged them together and got Chess Survivors, which was originally going to be a turn-based game. And then through, I think you even helped some of the idea, like coming up with the ideas over on the stream, but made it a little bit more actiony by giving it a turn timer, kind of like Crypto the Necrodancer. And then pushing it even more by like whenever you would do an action, it interrupts the turn. And so it really gave this snappy action feel to the gameplay throughout that summer of developing Chess Survivors and getting it released kind of then in November. I'm going to stop there because I feel like I've been talking a while. I stream so I can talk to myself for hours on end. So
I mean, you make my job easy. This is great. So I'm interested, how much were you... Because I remember when I quit my full-time job, immediately from day one, I was like, like I'm hanging over the coals now, and I have like a financial runway, and I have to make the best use of my time because I need to figure out if I can keep doing this. And so there's always been a financial pressure over since I left my job. Did you feel that when you were, because you were doing a lot of like kind of like reaching out and trying a bunch of different things, like streaming and YouTube and game development and trying to figure out which game you wanted to make and all of this stuff. Did you enjoy the process? Did you feel that financial pressure at all, or were you just going into it with like a real open heart, I guess?
The initial reason I felt comfortable enough to take that leap was because of my resume. My ability to like, since I'm a Salesforce engineer, Salesforce is a very specific platform. And my understanding of it is once you put it into a company, you can't really rip it out. So my job prospect is really like unchanging given the economic environment. Like I have a bunch of experience, so I can go get a job at any moment. That's like the backdrop of all of this, Thomas, is like, I think my ability to go get a job doing corporate engineering is really, really accessible. Will it be a good company? Maybe not, but I could definitely go get a job kind of on a whim that would be a job that would pay me six figures, which is an incredibly good baseline to come from as far as the risk analysis. Floundering around for basically like 5 months, did I feel weird about it? I think the biggest feeling I remember from that time was like going from being basically like, for someone my age, I would have considered myself rich. Like I own my own home. I was making $155,000 a year, to then like questioning if I needed to buy this thing at the grocery store or not, and like buying bottom shelf coffee and stuff like that. Like it was a very interesting perspective when my income throughout my 20s was always increasing and going upward, to now being like, oh, I don't make money anymore. That's a very that anxiety is what I remember the most. I think part of me didn't really think it was going to become something that could be a full-time adventure, like a full long-term thing. I knew that kind of between January and like October or November that year was going to be the amount of time given. But then come August, I think I was like, oh, I really like this. Sorry if I'm swearing on your channel. You don't want me to.
Hey, you're good.
I really liked it, and I was trying to find ways to start making money. So I had a Patreon. I had a tier on there where I was like hanging out with somebody once a month or something with like an hour of like Aarimous coaching time or just like Aarimous hangout time, whatever it was, which was kind of weird. I got like a part-time job teaching kids how to program that I eventually like gave up as well, because I'm like, you know what? I think the ship has passed of making this a full-time thing. So I drove toward getting Chess Survivors released. Basically, like, it released on November 11th of that year, and I think I got an offer for a new job like 3 days before then. And so I'm like, can I have the weekend? And I wanted to see if Chess Survivors would blow up and become a hit. It didn't. So that's why I ended up getting that full-time job again. And it was doing Salesforce stuff. So kind of like October of that year, I realized, I was like, you know what? This isn't actually going to be this isn't going to be a full-time endeavor for ... This is something that's coming to an end, which was emotionally challenging once I got the job. But I think, ultimately speaking, the weirdest part was just like, not having that income felt weird, emotionally speaking. But I guess I wasn't too worried about the money thing until like the last couple months.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you went into like self-employment with this idea of, this probably isn't going to last forever. I'm just going to kind of put myself out there, learn some skills, and have a project that I have completed before I have to turn back to the workforce. But you get towards the end of it and you start tying a bow on Chess Survivors, and it's garnering some interest, and you have this like little tingle of hope that you're like, oh, this could be something that brings in, a good chunk of money. And then you go to launch, and you, like you said, you have like the weekend to see if it like really pops off. It performs well, but not good enough for you to justify continuing working on it full time. And so then you end up going back into the workforce. How did that feel like? For one, how did you feel launching Chess Survivors? Because I remember you were getting noticed by some streamers, and it's like such a unique game concept where you were mashing in two very well-known ideas that seem to, you think about it, it's like Vampire Survivors and chess, and you're like, oh, what would that look like? And then you start playing, you're like, oh, this has like some really cool upgrades and like a really fun game loop. And so I don't know, what was that whole process like?
The actual launching of it all was interesting. So I'd done the Steam Next Fest that October, and that was the kind of this could be something, because I think at that point, before I went to the Steam Next Fest, when I launched the demo in July, I'm working backwards, so sorry if it's confusing. In July of that year, I launched the demo, and then Retromation played the demo on his channel, and he had some fun. The video got 20,000 views, and I remember running around my house being excited, being like, oh my gosh. So I think part of why I eventually was like, oh, I think I could do this full time. I guess I could blame Retromation, but like him playing it on his channel was like, okay, there's something about this game that's interesting. Up until then, it was just like people on stream being like, oh, this could be cool, this could be fun, whatever. But like seeing a player play it and then seeing like the wish list go from 0 to like 300 from the course of his videos, like, oh, interesting. Let's see what can happen here. And then the wish list just stopped. And then when we got to the October Next Fest, it went from like 300 or 400 at that point to, I think I got to like 1,200 wish lists, because then like when you're in the Next Fest, that's a lot of like eyes on your game from players. This isn't like game developers. It's like players seeing your game and liking it. So then that's why I think when I went into early access in November, I was like, there's a chance. There's a small chance I'd reach out to a bunch of streamers, just sending them personal emails saying, hey, I didn't offer anybody any money because I didn't have any money, but I was like, hey, this is the thing. I said a personal note about the content they like and why I think it fit their channel. And I think I got a decent number of people. Retromation played it again. And then I think eventually Wanderbots played it during EA as well. So some nice kind of like goodwill marketing, I think is what I would call it. I'm just like, hey, I'm a cool dude. I'm not saying like a spammy email. It's just like, I'm Aarimous playing my game. So then the emotions of actually releasing it were like that small voice in the back of my head of being like, what if it blows up, like quiet voice, we're trying to make a game here. So actually putting it out was kind of exciting, trying to get up to that 10 review list, like sending it out to my friends to play it and stuff like that. I believe you were probably one of the first 10 reviews, so I appreciate that. It was stressful. I basically stopped streaming the month before I released just because I was like, I'm not being productive enough on stream, and I just need to like grind out a playable version of this game for early access. And post-launch, I know the post-launch blues are something that people feel. I went like right into like patching mode. So I didn't start my job until like December 1st or something. So I had kind of the rest of November to like basically get the early access version of Chess Survivors playable, and like boy was I super wrong about the difficulty curve of the game, and like I immediately like spent almost all the patching is like changing balancing curves and like adding in ascension mode and stuff like that, so people who found it easy could find it harder and stuff like that. And a lot of bug fixing, a lot of crash reports, a lot of that stuff that I think as my first game you'd expect to have to like try to go fix. So it was a weird time, and then I had a full-time job again, and I 100% got depressed for like a month or two, where I tried to be like, oh, I have a job again, and I have like stress from that job again, and now I have like this early access game that I want to work on, but I don't have enough time, and it became weird. It was a very weird time.
Yeah, I can imagine that, like butting up against starting a new full-time job with like subsequently right after releasing this big project, and I can just imagine that's like a whole whirlwind of emotions. Were you trying to figure out, I guess first, you know, what, like looking back, what do you feel like you learned during that span of self-employment, but also self-development, because I think it was both. But what were some of your big takeaways when you think back about that time?
I think that realization in August and September of like, I want to make this a full-time adventure really bit me. Like not bit me, but like I got the itch to like do this again. And so I knew I was kind of feeling it was winding down. And ultimately, I think the framing of that whole 9-month adventure should have been like, this is a sabbatical from work. You've worked for 5 or 6 years. You saved up a bunch of money. You're going to take a break and basically spend, I think it was like $25,000 on living expenses, but just like take a break from a job and then go back into work again. But what ended up happening was that in those last couple months, I was like, oh, I really like this. I want to do this again. I think I could figure out how to make this business function. And it wasn't like this, I want to make a dream game. Chess Survivors surely isn't my dream game. But I think it was like, I really liked the idea of having complete creative control over what I'm working on, when I'm working on it, how I'm functioning, what I'm doing in my own life. I like the challenge of how many different things you can do in game development and how many different things have to be done just good enough to make a cohesive experience for other people. So yeah, I think that was something I learned quite a bit about myself, is that like I knew kind of going into the end of it that I was going to do it again. Like I knew immediately, like, well, I guess I didn't know immediately. I feel like when I got really depressed, I kept thinking of myself as like I failed, because I eventually put the unrealistic expectations that come with any game release, that I'm like, I'm going to make this be a full-time thing, ... I even like had conversations with my partner. I was like, she has a full-time job. And I was like, you know, can you like start carrying more of the burden of our financial expenses and stuff like that? And that was a weird conversation and probably pretty unfair for her. But, so I think eventually after I got kind of over that, like, okay, I didn't fail. I more just like, I put those unrealistic expectations on myself. I knew I was going to want to do it again at some point.
I had a follow-up question, and I can't remember what it was.
Martin, what was the question?
Come on, Martin. Pay attention.
He says nothing.
Oh, I remember talking to you during this time where you got your new job, and you were, I remember you articulating that you had felt like you had failed in some respects, and you were thinking through a lot of that stuff. But also I remember you distinctly saying that it was nice having a steady paycheck again, and how that kind of like, I don't remember exactly what you said. Maybe you remember it better than I do. But
I feel like you trade anxieties. Like having a job has a certain amount of stress. Like, what am I going to wake up into on any given day of work? Are you going to come in there and there's going to be a bunch of emails you have to deal with, or some sort of fire that started over the evening, or X, Y, or Z, and you're like, you're doing things out of this like duty to do your job, so they'll keep paying you money. When you're full time, you're much more anxious about that. Where's the paycheck coming from? I've talked to a lot of people who are consultants and stuff like that, but it's like, it doesn't matter what that thing is, but if it's like you don't have that steady, stable income, that's some anxiety. Even in a job itself, I feel like there's some like illusions of that being reliable. And if you're at a company where you are worried about getting laid off and stuff like that, that's a really great opportunity to go look for a different sort of job. And like you said about your job, like if you're somewhere where, and in your life, if you're in a position where a layoff would be catastrophic and you would all of a sudden be like missing paying bills, you'd have to figure out where to get money for food from, and you have a family to think about, like that's the type of stuff where it's like your job isn't necessarily a stable thing, especially like if you feel like your company's not stable. That's a great thing to think about in your head of like, okay, maybe I need to find something else that is more stable.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big thing that I felt back then was like, you having money again, not going to like the grocery store and being like, do I need this or need that? Just like the amount of money I was making. So my new job, I had like $135,000 a year, way cooler company, doing Salesforce stuff again, but like having that income again felt really good, especially because like that whole year I basically made like no money, which is different this time around. But
yeah,
that was definitely a nice feeling. But on top of it being like, God, I wish I could have. It's like when you know something new and you want to go back to your past self and tell them something. To be like, hey, here's how you could do this better, or here's how you could have like I wish I could like take those first 4 or 5 months where I was basically floundering and been like, here's a better way to spend your time. Start making chess survivors now, because then maybe I could have made 2 games that year instead. But that's just not how life works. You can't go backwards.
Yeah,
and I think that's a hard thing to deal with.
100%. So when you get your new full-time job, are you still doing game development? What was your philosophy around YouTube and streaming and game dev? Did that all take a back seat because you didn't have time for it, or were you trying to juggle both, or how did that look?
I quit streaming. I basically only would stream randomly for game jams. So I basically quit streaming in September of that year because I wanted to get Chess Survivors done and like into an early access state. But Chess Survivors was an early access, which is an awesome decision. I look back at the decision like that was so smart, because the game wasn't full of the content I wanted, but it had the core there. And so then over the next 10 months, I spent kind of every month having like 2 to 3 patches of content for Chess Survivors. So I did move it into a hobbyist project, which is actually really, really good for an early access game, to be like, oh, what do I want to do today? Oh, I'm going to do 5 more relics, or I'm going to add a new ability, or I'm going to work on some art for a character. And so it's those things that are really nice about any sort of a roguelike game where content is the issue. You can just keep building in more content into that roguelike adventure. So it's actually a really nice thing to have as a hobbyist project. And yeah, I kind of just basically spent the whole 10 months doing that. Finally then cutting down the scope of the game to a point where I could release it, because I was kind of ready to be done and move on to the next game. So then August of 2023, basically 10 months after it went into early access, I fully released Chess Survivors. But it was very hard to change my brain to thinking how much progress was reasonable to make given that I had a full-time job. So going from like no job stress, all the time in the world, I could spend 8 hours working on stuff, to like, oh, I probably have 5 to 10 hours a week at max. Some weeks 0 hours, some weeks negative hours of work, was a very weird thing to do. And so then the YouTube videos also probably became like once a month, maybe. I don't know how often I did YouTube videos back then. Yeah, no streaming, and then some YouTube videos and patches for chess survivors constantly, which I think helped drive wish lists. So it launched with 2,000 wish lists, which is a fair amount, but the goal for an indie game is 7,000 to 10,000. And now I look at the numbers, and the total wish list ever for chess survivors is like 12,000. So it's over the time it's slowly grown in its wishlist values, and now I have an outstanding wishlist count of like 6,000. So pretty cool and very helpful for this time around to have like chess survivors still be selling.
Totally. Cool. So let's fast forward to where you get to the point where you were like, okay, I want to do this again. Like what did that process look like? What did you do? Any more preparation? Did you have a different mindset? Like how, I'm really interested in this like transition of like, okay, I was self-employed doing, game dev and YouTube and streaming, and then I'm gearing up to do it again, and I have a better idea of what that looks like. So like what was your philosophy and like your plan going into it round 2?
I decided I wanted to save up a certain amount of money. So I think probably like Q1 of 2023, I would have then made the decision to like, okay, I want to keep saving it up. I was already I'm like a very frugal person with my money, and I live a pretty cheap life. So I kind of tried to keep that cheap life going. I did play a lot of golf that year, which was kind of expensive, but I was making more money again, so I thought that was worthwhile. So that summer I played a lot of golf and things like that. But just really trying to be really frugal. I've done a monthly budget for myself ever since I graduated college, where I know how much money I'm spending, where I'm spending it. I have a really, it's just an Excel spreadsheet. There's plenty of apps you can do out there, which I would recommend you do. Not you, but the viewer.
I do.
I would. And then I know how much money I'm taking in, so I know the difference. And that helped me pay down loans. And then now in life, it helps me understand how much money I was saving back then, so then I could allocate that either toward paying off other debts or like putting that into like a little nest egg that I called my studio funding. So I was basically trying to build up that funding again, while also spending some of that excess income on like trying to keep putting money into retirement accounts. Because I think part of that like risk reward analysis is like, well, yeah, I might be just spending $25,000 or $40,000, which is a lot of money, on paying myself to live and like do this adventure, but I'm also foregoing like retirement account investments and stuff like that. If I'm not making enough money to put in retirement accounts, like I'm surely not contributing to a 401k while I'm in the negative.
Yeah, there's opportunity cost for compounding interest. Yeah,
absolutely. So that year I tried to spend some time buffing those accounts back up again. But having had kind of pretty high paying salaries, I'm not too worried about that in the long run because I spent a lot of my 20s filling up those retirement accounts. But yeah, as I geared up toward getting ready for this second adventure, I think my goal ended up being like 2025 or 2026 was when I thought I could actually hit it. Based off of how much money I was saving, because I could see the averages, you can then project out into the future to say, given how much I spend, given how much I make, at what point will I have enough money then, given my known expenses, to do a year or a 2-year adventure of kind of giving yourself that burn rate of funding for a studio. And yeah, so I think the goal was 2025 or 2026, but then Chess Survivors kept selling, and because it kept selling, I ended up making enough money to basically like beginning of this year, I was like, oh, I have enough money where I could do this for like a year and a half, 2 years. I was like, that's kind of cool. That was a very, very like interesting surprise and really sparked my want to go do this again. And interestingly enough, my very first video of this year was saying that I wanted to change my life this year. I was in a support role at my last job. The company was great. The people I worked with were great. But I got really, really burnt out of being in a support job. And I had talked to the people I was working with, and they were going to find me a new role kind of at the beginning of our financial year, which was February. But in January, I was like, I don't know if I, like, looking at my finances, like, I have enough money to do this for a year and a half at least. I was like, I don't want them to find me a new role only for me to quit mid-year and, like, screw over this company of people that I really enjoy working with. And so then I made the decision. I gave them a month notice, and then March 1st went full-time again. Now, you asked about if I had a plan going into it. I was going to stream again. I kind of knew that for certain because although streaming is a lot of energy and a lot of work, I find the collaborative nature of game design and like iterative feedback live, it's really, really helpful for like that first prototyping phase of a game. So I knew I would do that. I was already doing YouTube still, so I'd probably ramp that back up to like more videos or like weekly videos or something like that. And then my idea for a game was going to be a puzzle game where you was like doing math puzzles and stuff like that. But that game ended up not being something I wanted to make. And instead I dove into like a mini mining project that I had come up with as an idea. And so that's kind of, I launched off into trying to make that as a full-time game, and eventually made Hexag God instead. So
yes. Okay. So there's a lot in that.
There is.
So you have some additional funding coming in from Chess Survivors, and that helps you give you some stability and kind of the springboard to dive in round 2, and you're trying to figure out exactly what project you want to go all in at, because this time around you're thinking, okay, I want to, last time I would have started Chess Survivors really early and tried to get even another whole game out the door if I could. And so you're like, okay, what can I start working on? And you start doing these different game prototypes, and you have one that you started and you're like, I don't think this one has legs. And then you start with another one and you're like, I think that the scope of this one is too broad for me to tackle in a reasonable time. So then you start working on the project that you are in the throes of right now, which is Hexag God. So how did that game come about?
I think the funniest thing about kind of the 3 games in a row, which the first one's called Fibonacci's Final Sequence, and then Voidstone was the mining game, and now Hexag God, is I think we as developers trick ourselves into being like, no, this one's the one. And in actuality, I should be calling that like a prototyping phase, where I wasn't like starting a project and then failing it. I basically built a puzzle math prototyping game that was like a Zachtronics game. I built a mining game that was a prototype, a very robust prototype, and then I like worked on Hexag God as a way to like refresh my brain from the mining and crafting game. And I think that's where Hexag God ended up coming from, is that I started to get into this analysis paralysis mode with this mining and crafting game. Like, the way I was framing it in my head and like thinking about it ended up making the game like need to be too much, need to like have too much fun, need to be too good, need to have too much dynamicism, and like end up being like too much in my head. And so I kept getting like caught up in like trying to build these really robust like technical systems, which is not the developer I am, Thomas. I am a like, let's just make it like good enough for now, and then we'll like find the fun, and then we'll move toward the fun, and like throw away code and throw away ideas and just like really, really like move around the game space and figure out what works. I'm not really somebody who can like architect out a game and then go execute on that. It's much more like I'm like slowly building it up over time, and then eventually I have a game that is fun because I've iteratively done it live on stream or on YouTube channels, and people can tell me if it's fun or not, and I can like trust my gut if it's fun or not. So Hexag God ended up being a little challenge for myself to like get back to that sort of development work, because I went into this adventure with now the known goal of I want to make my business profitable. I put too much pressure onto the mining and crafting game to make it like fun and good. And then I lost the having fun in making a game. So the goal of Hexag God was a 30-day project where I was going to take one of my old Game Jam games and just like build out a little bit more of a game and kind of refactor it and like get it into a game that I could release on Steam in 30 days. once I got to that 30-day mark, and that's like 30 working days, so it was like mid-May to the end of June was kind of the actual time span of it. But when I got to the end of it, I'm like, this game's kind of fun. There's something here. And I decided to then try to get it into I basically got it into a demo state, launched the game onto a demo state, and then Retromation played the game again without me asking him. I don't know how he finds Aarimus's games, but he also plays like 3 games a day on his channel, which is awesome. And seeing him play it, seeing him have fun, seeing where Chess Survivors was when I released it into demo versus like when he played this game when it released into demo, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can see how far I've come as a developer and as a designer and like how many more skills I have. So I'm like, you know what? Like I said at the beginning of this podcast, I'm going to use my time and keep investing it to where I see the value. I had full intentions of going back into the mining game, but I'm like, this game has some legs on it. This game could be something real. And then a publisher reached out to talk about Hexag God, which was another wrinkle in the kind of that like another like checkbox on the list of like there's something here that you should keep investing your time into.
Yeah, and that's got to feel so legitimizing for you too, right? That because usually developers are out there trying to get funding, pitching their game to different publishers, but when you get approached by a publisher, that must have felt like a really good sign.
It was a really good sign. It was such a good sign that I thought it was like spam or like a bad thing. And so that was in the back of my head the whole time working through talking with the publishers and stuff like that. I'm like, I could just be getting screwed here because this feels too good to be true. And I ultimately walked away from using the publisher because I don't need them. And like I said, my business plan is to be lean and like agile in my abilities. And that was going to put on some like administrative burden and just like, it's going to make Hexag God too much again.
Yeah.
I think that's the big thing I've learned in the last 6 months here. I guess it's been 7 months now, is like, I want to try to make it sure that I'm having a good time and I'm having fun making the games, because then that's going to seep into the games I'm making. It's going to make sure that like what I'm creating is something that is fun. There's not as much pressure on myself, because even when I was talking to that publisher, I had days where I was like incapable of being creative because my brain was in this like risk analysis and like almost like a fear state of like what could happen if this goes well, what could happen in the worst case scenario if the publisher sues me, and all these things eventually led to me like walking away from the publisher a couple weeks ago, even though it would have been probably a really good opportunity for Hexag God to reach more people. I think ultimately for me as a studio, it would have been a mistake, but I guess only time will tell.
So it's interesting because what I find so interesting about talking to you is that like I think both of us early on had the notion that like, oh, other people can go and make indie games and do that full time, but that's not a feasible thing for me. And now it's interesting because we've been going at it. We're both playing the long game, you know, and trying to be wise about how we approach game development in general. And but also we're far enough along that both of us can look back and be like, oh, that's crazy how I used to be back there, and now look at like all of these opportunities that are cropping up, and things are kind of snowballing, and I'm able to make games that I want to play instead of just like all of these small prototypes and like tech demos, you know. So that's been really cool because I feel like you and I have been very neck and neck for a lot of it. Like it was kind of funny because you went full time the first time, and I was kind of following your progress, and then right as I quit my job, you went back into the workforce, and so then we kind of high-fived on our way, you know. I was on my way out, you were on your way back in, and then now we're both full-time making our own games and making YouTube videos, and our YouTube channels are like neck and neck all the time. We're always like
catching up.
I know you've been going hard. You've been putting a lot of good videos out.
It is the best sort of competition for me, of like the friendliest thing. I'm like, I want to keep up. Like, I don't want you to get too far away from me. Because eventually if you get too far ahead, then I'm like, well, he's just in a different league now.
Yeah,
Like if we can
exactly.
keep up together, we can keep pushing each other to make more content.
Totally. Yeah. So it's cool to see where you're at and the games that you're making now that are super fun, and like you getting these opportunities to talk to publishers and get funding for that and stuff. And yeah, I don't know, it's really cool. Um, but one thing that I wanted to ask you is like I'm I'm always very forward thinking, and I'm not as retrospective as I should be probably.
Hmm.
These YouTube videos help, I think, because it makes me kind of like plant my feet and look around and be like, okay, what's been going on, like, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm interested if you were giving advice to somebody who is in a similar position where they have like a full-time job but they want to make games, like what advice would you give them? Or like if you were, I guess if you were trying to give advice to your younger self, what would that look like?
Hmm.
And this can be, it doesn't have to be like about how to make it work financially for you to make,
Yeah.
you know, game dev like a full-time career, but like how, like even if it's about like how to make good games, you know, like what are some of your major learnings that you think would be good advice for people?
I have a lot of it.
That's why I asked.
I think for going full time, I would tell somebody to like think about the risks of it and like what you're potentially giving up, and you have to be comfortable with the worst case scenarios, and like that should be at the forefront of your brain. I know it's exciting to think about, oh, I can make a game and it could become a hit indie game and I can make millions, but like I made this in most recent videos, like the most likely outcome is you're going to fail. Your game's not going to be sustaining, and that's a reality you have to be comfortable with. So if given that being the outcome, are you okay with the fact that you might just lose $50,000? Is that catastrophic for your future financial life? Those are things you should like consider going into the decision. From a game making perspective, which is a bit more fun, I think that design is super, super important for video games. Like thinking through the emotions you want to invoke from your players and figuring out the experiences and like what do you want your player to feel when they're done with the game, when they put it down and they beat it, or they end a run, or they're just they're going on a walk and they're thinking about the game later. What do you want them to be left with? Knowing those really kind of fundamental ideas is really helpful to inform any other decision you're making in your game. What color palette are you using? Is it really bright or vibrant, or is it muted? Is it a monochromatic palette? Is it a 2D game, a 3D game, a VR game? Who knows? I guess you could even have like an XR game. So understanding the emotions and the things that you want the players to feel and be taken away with is going to help inform everything else you're doing in your game. So without that understanding, you're not going to be able to, I think, make the game you want to make. You can be technically just the best program in the world, but if you to make a design decision that is a bad design decision, or something that's unfun and doesn't match your goals, it doesn't matter how good your code is. The game has to be fun at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where design comes in huge, and has been something I've really, really enjoyed sinking my teeth into more. And if you don't know how to do design, play other games and check in with yourself and think, why am I having fun? Why do I want to go out and do this activity? Like, I'm so excited, or I just got this piece of loot and I'm through the moon, or I got this upgrade, or I got this relic. Why do I feel so excited right now? Or why do I feel so sad that, you know, this emotion happened? Maybe this story beat happened and I'm like, I have melancholy. Or you're in a horror game and you're terrified. What did they do that made you feel terrified? Because it's hundreds of small things. And if you can start to dissect your own emotions as you're playing games, that can inform how you could do similar things in the games you're going to make. So that would be the big thing for making a game that I think I'm trying to do a lot with Hexag God right now, is think about those emotions and those feelings I want the players to feel, and then create systems around those feelings.
Nice. I love that. Emotion-driven design.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really
We're
good
emotional
advice.
beings, Thomas.
Yeah,
That's all we got.
No. We are cerebral beings, and we just think in logic, and that's what dictates all of our decisions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we don't eat for 4 hours, we can make really dumb decisions because we're hangry.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. That is kind of all of the questions that I wanted to hit. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up before we close it out?
Not too much. I would just say if you're unhappy with your life, think about that and like dwell on that feeling. If you're in a situation where you don't like your job, there's other jobs out there. You can change your career. The amount of money you make in this world does not determine how cool of a person you are. It just really gives you the freedom to do other things, which is directly related to how much money you're spending. If you go out and buy really expensive car loans and you buy a really expensive house, you have to start making that amount of money every year. So thinking about money as a form of like, what sort of job do you need to have can really change the way you view the next 10 years of your life or something like that. So if you're unhappy, think about why you're unhappy and try to make changes to do it, because I never thought I'd be somebody who would quit my job and go make my own business or go make video games, because I'm a very risk-averse person in general. But through the way I structured my life, I found a path forward to making it feel not as risky of a decision and something that I'm comfortable with, and I can sleep easy at night because I have a grasp of my own finances. So that's just a plug to do a budget and think about your life and be introspective and know that you can change your life. And people will tell you you're being dumb or that you're maybe wasting your money. Not that anyone's told me that, but I definitely think people have thought that. And it doesn't matter. It's your life. You could be in control of it. And it's really, really enjoyable when you do grab the reins and run forward and fall flat on your face and stand back up.
Yeah, totally. And everybody's different, right? And it was really illuminating for me when I decided to make a spreadsheet of trying to rate different career trajectories that I could potentially take. And I was thinking about all of the things that I would categorize, like why I would want to do one career over the other, and including things like how much I enjoy it, if it gives me a sense of purpose, how it contributes to like my social life and like talking to coworkers and stuff, the opportunity to learn, how difficult it is, like how much money you'd make. There's like all of the independence that you get, the time autonomy, the geographical autonomy. There's so many things that contribute to what, and everybody's priorities would be different, so you might find that, it's game dev is really, really cool because it ties in everything that I want to do. And it's like the perfect mesh of art and math and entrepreneurialism and like learning new skills and getting to meet cool people, so anyway, Aarimous, it's been a blast. Thank
Always
you.
is. I enjoy talking with you.
Same. I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast. I'll leave some links in the description so people can check out your games and your YouTube channel and your Twitch channel. Is there anything else that you want to plug so that people can follow what you're doing?
That's it. Go follow me on YouTube, and the rest will come through random videos and stuff like that. But make sure you like this video too. If you made it this far,
like and
you have
subscribe.
to, and leave a comment.
That's
talk
right.
about my cat.
Yeah.
You've been up there the whole time,
Martin. I had a comment on one of my videos recently that made me laugh out loud, and it was just one word. It said engagement. And so somebody was like, I have nothing thoughtful to contribute, but I'm just going to help you with the algorithm and comment engagement. And I thought that was so funny.
Yeah, I love that stuff. They're like, yeah, we get it. It's an algorithm-driven world.
Yep, totally. Also link our podcast that we upload on the Irregular Scope Creepers so that we can, we have these conversations, irregularly, but we have a few up there.
There's 4 episodes, right?
Yeah. So
yeah.
That's a good time. So if you want more Thomas Aarimous duo in your life, go check that out. And keep us updated with what you're up to. And I'll see you around.
Bye.